evening and welcome to the April 4th, 2018 Calaveras Council of Governments meeting. Our first order of business will be the Pledge of Allegiance. If you'd stand and join us. I pledge allegiance
to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Our next item is the consent agenda. Consent agenda items are expected to be routine and non-controversial and will be acted upon by the council at one time without discussion. Any council member, staff member, or interested party may request that an item be removed from the consent agenda for further discussion. Do we have any consent agenda items being requested by the council to be pulled? Any staff? Any public?
I will move this item, Mr. Chair.
Second.
Moved by Councilmember Tofinelli, seconded by Councilmember Mills.
No.
All those in,
No.
oh, Councilmember Mudries, I'm sorry. Tim. All those in favor?
Aye.
Approved 7-0. Our first regular agenda item is public comment. Public comment is limited to 5 minutes per person and shall be limited to items that are within the subject matter jurisdiction of the council and not on the posted agenda. Do we have any public comment? Okay, seeing none. Item number 6, the report out of closed session. The council held a closed session on March 7th pursuant to government code. There was no reportable action. Item number 7, presentation by Richardson and Company with the request for acceptance by the council of the fiscal year 2016-17 Annual Transportation Development Act TDA financial audits. I believe this is initiated by Ms. Raggio.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. The RTPA and the transit system are required to submit annual financial reports to the state controller's office. It's a requirement of the Transportation Development Act. Our consultant is Richardson and Company. Brian Nash, a partner of Richardson and Company, is here, and I'll hand it over to him to give the presentation.
Well, good evening. Back again. So to give you kind of an overview of how the audit went, it was pretty similar to the prior year when we, as you know, we mentioned there was what we considered to be deficiencies due to lots of adjustments found during the audit. Pretty similar this year, although there were fewer adjustments this year that we found. We could tell that the county auditor controller spent more time working on the chart of accounts, so there were additional accounts set up, some additional work done to make sure the balances were correct. So we did see some improvement this year, although there were still quite a few adjustments that we found, and that's something that I know you have a bookkeeper hired to help you with going forward. The bookkeeper just didn't have time to get up to speed this year to close the books before we began the audit. You should have a agenda that's been provided. There's 2 letters. One is addressed to the council members and management, which we consider to be, we call this the management letter. And then there's one that's addressed just to the council members. That is a letter of required disclosures to a governing body, and it's in my, it's what the bullet points on the outline are. So I'm going to cover everything in that letter. Then you should have the Calaveras Council of Governments financial statements and a draft of the county transit fund financial statements, and then also a draft of the City of Angels financial statements. City of Angels Camp. I get confused whether I should call it Angels or Angels Camp. So we did all of those audits under the contract with the Council of Governments. One of the things to keep in mind is management is responsible for the financial statements. Our responsibility is to provide our opinion based on our audit. The Council of Governments financial statements includes a clean opinion, meaning no modifications. But the transit fund, there's a correction of an error. Last year we forgot to split out the restricted cash for some unspent grants. We did that this year, and because it changed the cash in the statement of cash flows, accounting standards say you have to consider that to be a restatement. So there's a restatement referenced in the opinion. Otherwise, it's similar to last year. So I'd like to go over the... Excuse me.
Those were the grants for the
Shelters
LCTOP.
ADL system.
Yeah. There-
Yes.
That's the one he's talking about. The transit fund also utilizes PTMISA, Cal OES, but I think he's speaking to the LC.
LC top, there's
And
40...
then it was the unspent for the shelters.
Yes.
Yes.
and he'll
That's
get
what-
into- yeah.
Okay. All right.
So I'm going to first go over the management letter. The management letter is addressed to the council and management. As I mentioned, because we found a number of audit adjustments, we found, 17 for CalCog and 13 for the transit fund, so 30 in total, which is 11 fewer than the prior year. We report in the management letter and in the compliance report in the back of the financial statements of each financial statement, what's considered to be a deficiency in internal control. That's something when you find a lot of audit adjustments, material adjustments, you have to report that under audit standards. So we have a plan to make sure that that doesn't happen again. There's a bookkeeper that's been hired, as you all know. We know the bookkeeper. We know the bookkeeper does good work. We have many clients that bookkeeper works with. So we're pretty confident that once the bookkeeper, Rob Merritt, has time to get up to speed, he can help the council close the books. It's a little more than the county has time to do. They just account for the Council of Governments as an agency fund in the county financial statements. It's really kind of an afterthought for the county financial statement. So it takes a lot of time to be able to make sure all these entries are closed. So I'm sure next year that would be... we'll be reporting something different. We'll be happy to report that everything's under control. Closing entries are posted by the council. The management letter recognizes that you have the qualified bookkeeper now, the contract accountant. We're confident that they can close the books. There's a couple of comments about some of the things that the council does internally to make sure numbers are correct, and when the closing process happens, the bookkeeper should use those reconciliations that Melissa prepares to make sure all the numbers are correct. The financial statements reports a general fund, and it also reports a government-wide fund, and there's accounts for that, and that's something that should be reconciled as part of the closing process. That's one of the comments we have. There are some payables that Melissa had identified that needed to be posted, but then they didn't get posted in the general ledger. So those are the types of things that we want to see happen going forward. Melissa does know what the numbers need to be in the financial statements to make sure everything's correct, and it's just a matter of taking that next step to make sure it's recorded. There's one other item that we just kind of recommended a best practice. It's not considered to be a deficiency. It's the very last item on the management letter. We vouched an invoice and then got the check, and the check wasn't made out to the same name as the invoice. Apparently it was the owner of the company that provided the invoice. The check was cut to the owner instead of cut to the company that the invoice was named, that was named on the invoice. So that just the best practice is to make sure that audit trail exists, where if you're cutting a check, it should be to the same entity as the name on the invoice, or if it's not, there should be some documentation explaining what happened. And there was nothing inappropriate. It was just a kind of a documentation issue, best practice. So now I'm going to switch to the financial statements for the council governments. So all of you should have this. I'd like to turn your attention to page 6 of the financial statements. It's what's called Management's Discussion and Analysis. It's a good summary of what happened during the year. There's a summarized balance sheet and income statement on page 6 and 7 of the financial statements, and you can kind of see the major changes that occurred. On page 6, you can see The restricted cash investments, you can see those decline. Those are the grant funds that are received in advance of expenses. The $321,000 was the bus purchase that, the bus money that went to the county transit fund. And so that's the reduction there. There's still some money held over, and that is for the vehicle, bus stops and a vehicle location system. There's some PTM, ISEA, PATEMSA, and then there's some LC top for bus stop lighting. So I know those projects are ongoing because they're expenses during the 17. The pension liability and long-term liabilities was pretty steady, didn't change much. The deferred inflows and deferred outflows on that page, those are related to the pension plan. If kind of an example of what those are is if there's an interest earnings assumption for the pension plan that CalPERS has, 7.65%, I guess it was during the year I was auditing. If the earnings were higher or lower than that, they defer it and they bring it into the pension liability over time. And so it's deferred and called a deferred on the top, deferred outflow. And then the same thing happens if there's a expense that's going to be amortized into the pension liability. It's called a deferred inflow. That's what those are. You'll see the restricted net position down at the bottom changed the same as the restricted cash. Unrestricted net position is up a little bit along with the current assets, changes in the current assets and other items on the balance sheet. There are some receivables that were collected last year from 16, and then there's receivables in 17. So the increases created the increase in unrestricted net position. That's the spendable money. If you turn to page 7, you'll see that the revenues are down a little bit on the program revenues and the LTF, and the expenses are down as well. Those were for the Wagon Trail Highway 49 Gateway project. Those were higher expenses in the prior year, so it declined a little bit in the current year. I'd like to point you now to page 34, which is the LTF and STAF funds. On page 34, that's the statement of fiduciary net position. That's the kind of the balance sheet for the private purpose trust funds. The LTF fund, you'll see that there was $908,000 of unapportioned net position. So that's quite a bit of money hanging around. And then you'll see the State Transit Assistance Fund had a negative net position. So what happened there was in 2016, the state said that there was going to be more money available than what they actually provided. And so there was an allocation that exceeded the amount of revenue that was actually received in 2016. And it's still hanging around. So if you look at the page 35, the STA that was allocated agreed to the expenses. So, agreed to the revenue. So there's really no change in 17. We thought we had a plan to eliminate this deficit by reducing the amount that was allocated in 17, but it didn't happen. So that'll have to be done in 2018 or 2019, just depending on whether you want to amend the claim for transit, the money that the STA that the transit fund gets. But eventually you're going to need to reduce the amount that the transit fund gets below the revenue that's available to get rid of this deficit. So the money's been over allocated and it needs to be corrected. As far as the STA or the LTF, COG took 11,000 less in 17 than in 16, and the county took 370,000 more, and a lot of that was due to the county transit fund budget was really not making a whole lot of sense, so the COG appropriately held up payment of the claim until they got that budget straightened out, make it more realistic. I think if I remember right, they budgeted several $100,000 increase in expenses when really it didn't make any sense. They would fail their fair revenue ratio and didn't really make a whole lot of sense. And so the COG held up payment, and we thought that was appropriate. The staff talked to us about that. So that money was allocated in 16, 17 after that got straightened out. And the city received $34,000 it's been a couple years, I think, since the city received some money for street and road expenses, but the city received $34,000. Let's see. Something else that's different this year than in the past. There's a subsequent event footnote on page 31 that talks about the Joint Powers Authority that was created to take over the transit operations. And there's a footnote talking about the State of Good Repair program that the Council of Governments will probably already have started to receive some payments on that. So that's a good thing. It's an additional revenue source from gas tax money. And there's a footnote that discusses the council joining the Insurance Joint Powers Authority. So those are kind of the main items that stuck out to me that I thought I'd point out on the Council of Governments. I'd be happy to stop here and talk about anything in more detail if you'd like me to. Otherwise, I can go on to the transit fund. Okay. Okay, on the transit fund, if you look at page 3, you'll see what I was talking about on the restatement to the transit fund 2016 column. You'll see I broke out restricted cash and cash equivalents. That's the LC top, $47,059. That was included as a reduction of the due to other funds at the bottom. So the transit fund's being subsidized by the county general fund because the claims have been kind of late, both for federal money and for TDA money, the STA and LTF. And you can see that if you look at the due from other agencies account. Those are pretty large for an entity the size of the transit fund. So that money wasn't received at year end. And so the county general fund has subsidized the operations of the transit fund. So that $47,000 was included as a reduction of this due to other funds last year. So it was broken out. We do that on the Council of Governments also, showing the restricted cash. So it was just an oversight in last year's financial statements. So you can see, let's see, the fixed assets, the capital assets, you can see there was an increase, and that's the $302,000 of new buses, but then there's $213,000 of buses sold. And the buses were sold for a $16,000 gain, and that comes into play with the fair revenue ratio that I'll talk about in a minute. The pension liability, there's a fairly large pension liability on the transit fund. There's really only one employee, and that one employee generates $182,000 pension liability. And that increased quite a bit, and that's because the county's pension liability increased quite a bit. The transit fund is a very small percentage of the entire county pension liability. It didn't change, the percentage didn't change that much, but the county pension liability went up quite a bit. And so this amount got recorded here on the transit fund. It went up quite a bit. Let's see. One of the reasons the pension liability went up is the CalPERS earnings were down. So, unfortunately, the year that the pension liability was computed, the valuation for the June 30, 17 year was as of June 30, 15, and then it got rolled forward to June 30, 16. So we're talking about earnings back in those years for CalPERS were lower. More current years, I think they're up quite a bit. So you won't be able to see those until the valuations catch up. They're a couple years behind the balance sheet date. Let's see. If you look at page 4, the expenses before depreciation, so if you remove depreciation out of the expenses, actually went down. So they did some cost savings, $191,000 less. So went from $1.3 million if you remove depreciation in 2016 down to $1,131,000 in 2017, so that's good. The change in net position, you'll see there, that's largely due to the capital contributions. The net loss before contributions was $96,000, but then there was a contribution for the buses, and that increased the change in net position. So the county transit fund on page 5 has a deficit in spendable money. It's a $173,000 deficit on page 3. So now I'd like to turn to the fair revenue ratio, which is always a big issue. That is on page 13. So you'll see the fair revenue ratio includes, there's been a change in law that allows local funds to be included in the fair revenue ratio, and that includes advertising, so that's a stable revenue source. It also includes one-time money, so that the $16,000 gain on sale of capital assets is in there. And the county transit staff reached out to Caltrans and made sure that that was an appropriate addition to the fair revenue ratio, and they agreed it was. And then you'll see reductions for the extensions of services. There's a Delta Gold route, and then there's a Saturday Hopper route. So the revenues for that route are removed, as well as the expenses. So the fair revenue ratio turned out to be 9.59%. But if you did take out those one-time monies from the sale of the capital assets, it'd be back down into the high 7s, 7.9, I believe it was. So I don't think you can count on one-time monies like sale of capital assets to run the transit services. So that's not a good thing to really consider in the fair revenue ratio, in my opinion. But Caltrans says it belongs in there, and so we included it. So there's some work to do to look at the services to see if they can be revised so they can meet the fair revenue ratio. One thing that struck me is the extension of services. The Delta Gold route has about a 6% fair revenue ratio if you look at those revenues and expenses separately, and the Saturday Hopper 5.3%. The reason those are excluded is because the theory under the TDA book is that it takes a few years to get those up and running to where they're fully doing as well as they will do after a while. So those might be lower than they will be eventually, but those are pretty low. And I think the Delta Gold route did get it terminated, didn't it, on July 1st. So I understand you have a consultant that's going to be looking at some of these, at the services, and recommending some changes, and the consultant has his or her work cut out for them. Yeah. Okay. There's
He's the one that's smiling.
so I don't envy it.
Attorney Brad too.
So yeah, there's definitely some work to do, and if you can come up with a way to take these services and increase it back up to 10%, that'd be just wonderful, and I'm sure a relief for everybody. But there's a penalty if you don't meet the fair revenue ratio, and in the current year, that penalty is disclosed on the next page. It's only $4,100. And the way the progression works, the first year was 16, you get a break that year. 17, you measure the amount of the shortfall in fair revenues, and that's $41.39. The next year is the determination year, and then the penalty would be applied against 2019. So that's the year the JPA starts up operations, if everything goes as planned, from what I understand. So fortunately, the JPA is the one that's going to take the hit on that. But if you claim all the TDA revenues early in the year and have the cash in the bank, you can make that little amount up probably with interest. It's probably not that significant.
We don't get a break like when we change routes, you get a 2-year. We're changing to JPA. We don't get a 2-year default here.
Not that I know of, but, it's something that can be consulted, Caltrans can be consulted. Caltrans can be consulted to see if that's something that we could do, definitely. That's a good point. So the transit fund also discloses the new joint powers authority that was established. That's a subsequent event footnote in these financials as well. And that's about everything I could think of that was significant in those financial statements. If there's something you'd like to focus on a little more, I'd be happy to stop there. As far as the City of Angels Camp financial statements, we didn't have any issues there. We audited the expenses to make sure things were spent appropriately, and they seem to be. As far as the other required disclosures, one of the things we're supposed to point out is what estimates are in the financial statements. The fair value of the cash and investments in the county pool, that's an estimate. The cost reimbursement grant receivables are based on the fact that, or the assumption that the expenses are qualifying. Sometimes that changes. Sometimes the grantors come in and do an audit and decide that they didn't like what you claimed. Compensated absences, which is the vacation and sick leave liability. The pension liability, that's based on CalPERS valuation, that's an estimate. And the lives used for depreciation on capital assets. So the scope of the audit was consistent with the engagement letter. No difficulties were encountered in dealing with management during the audit. There's no disagreements, and no conditions on our hiring set by management. One thing I wanted to point out on the second letter, in case you saw this and were wondering what it is, there's what's called a summary of unadjusted differences attached to one of the letters. These are adjustments that should have been made that we passed on because they were immaterial. So there's nothing, no big, this is not a big deal. This happens from time to time on clients. We're required to keep track of any adjustment we didn't make to make sure if we add them together, they're not going to be a significant amount for the agency overall. So these are on the Council of Governments. So I wouldn't worry too much about these, but these are unadjusted differences. And with that, I'm done with my formal presentation, but be happy to expand on anything or answer questions.
Council, do you have any comments?
I remember last year my response to the audit, and I think we've turned a corner here, and the future looks a lot more stable. So I appreciate the detail that you put into this, and especially to note where we still have a little work to do.
Yes. Yeah, I would agree with you. Steps have been taken to really come up with a kind of a stable process to make sure things going forward are handled, both on the accounting side and on the operations side. Very pleased to see those steps taken.
Any other council comments? I wanted to note that although a lot of anglers go through the City of Angels to New Maloney's Lake, Angels Camp is ANGELS, and throughout your audit report and your letters, it seems to be the City of Angles rather than the City of Angels.
I'll fix that in the future. Thank you for pointing that out. I caught myself doing that a couple times already this week.
Okay.
Didn't catch them all.
Is there any public comment to our presentations this evening? If you'd like to, please come up to the podium, state your name. Yes, if you'd like to make a comment.
How's everyone? I am Ed Hall. I've been in the county about 5 years this coming May. And I was on that gold line. I believe that's the run that goes into Stockton. and they were running 5% was the goal, but it stayed under. And that was a beautiful run to the transit system, the hospital, Amador, Amtrak, and I think it's a matter of, let's say myself as a writer, contacting these different schools and just talking to the human resources people and saying, is there a need? And I'm just a writer. And to get their feedback, and the few people that are riding the bus, they'll have their comments, but I think it's a matter of communication. There's a posted sign within the bus that says we do so-and-so, and you've got what your goal line run is. And from other drivers, I heard that there was advertisement, free advertisement on the radio that could have been taken up so that the word gets out, also to the Columbia College. I'll probably say this. I met a lady, been in the Calaveras County for at least 10 years, going to a Treats grocery store. She had no idea that there was a hardware store down below, and I told her about that. And I started noticing that there's a communication problem going on, that final word, that little extra something just doesn't get through. And I got on my computer and started looking at the goal line runs and so forth. And I wanted to be a part of the force that gets out there and try to get this 5% ridership going on again. I don't know what to say at this point, but if I can come in and be a member somewhere or give my input, let you know the contacts that I've made. There's a lady here, I thought about this lady back there, maybe not, and she was just so upset that the run was being shut down. And the few that were on there, 2 or 3 riders, they desperately needed that system. A couple are handicapped, a couple are going to the school out there, and I'm kind of sort of feeling like the Lone Ranger here, trying to speak up for them. And I was surprised that they funded this run for 2 years, but they just couldn't get the ridership up. Something about that communication that goes on, and something is missing somewhere. You can post it on the bus, but flyers in the grocery store, wash house, and somehow, some way, through these bus drivers contacting the free radio advertisement, so that collectively things are going to start to happen. It's going to definitely take some teamwork, and I am definitely a concerned citizen. So from here, what would we do as a public person, single person, just to do what I'm doing now? And
I thank you for your comment. We have a Social Services Transportation Advisory Council, and I believe we're looking for a transit rider to participate on that, if I'm not mistaken.
Yeah, that's correct, and that would be, a perfect opportunity to get your input on when we make transit service changes. If I could actually get off Aaron, our staff member, get your contact information so that I can send you that information.
Okay.
Would that be okay?
I'll add just a little bit more. My wife actually works for the Silver Street Transportation. She does dispatch and whatnot. And she's actually had to drive a few times herself. And I used to drive East Bay Paratransit back in Oakland, the Bay Area. And also I did shuttle driving to the airport, to the Coliseum BART station, and did some driving out at Hayward to their county offices. So, but I thank you. I'd be glad to get my information to you. Okay. And take whatever you have to give to me.
Okay. Thank you for your comments.
Okay. Dankeschön.
Is there any other public comment? This item, With a request for acceptance by the council, okay.
So moved.
Yeah. I would just also like to thank the county auditor, controller's office for all of their help in participating in this last audit, and Brian and his staff and their patience, all the work that went into getting these here today.
It's important, too, to note that that is noted in the management letter, that that cooperation level is improved. So,
Because we can't get here without it.
absolutely. So thank you for being sure to make that comment. I'd move the item, Chair.
So we have a motion by Councilmember Mills, second by Councilmember Munides, to accept the TDA audits presented by Richardson Company. All those in favor?
Aye.
Approved 7-0. Thank you again, Mr. Richardson.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Item number 8 is the minute order approving the programming of fiscal year 2018-19 through 22-23 call for projects for the RSTP, CMAC, and LTF funds. Ms. Collins.
All right, thank you. The board initiated this call for projects in December with approval of the guidelines and the new timely use of funds policies. That was the opening of the process to program the projects using the estimated funding through fiscal year 22-23. Really, the purpose of this process is to develop an even playing field between the city and county to select projects that best meet the regional benefits and goals, and that are strategically programmed to maximize and leverage our regional funds. So staff is back now to present a summary of the process that we went through with the city and county, the proposed projects, and really the approach that we took towards the recommended programming for your consideration. And we have Steve Vandenberg back with us. He was here in December to do the presentation, and he'll walk us through our recommendation.
Good evening. Okay, as a way of background on this item, Calaveras COG receives discretionary state and federal funding, and it is the uses of these funds are at your discretion. In particular, for this item and for this call for projects, we're talking about 3 funding sources: Regional Surface Transportation Program funding, Congestion Mitigation Air Quality funding, and Local Transportation funds. So these are funds that can be used for roadway as well as bicycle, pedestrian, and even transit purposes. You periodically issue calls for projects to solicit project nominations for these funding sources, and you are, again, the body that makes the discretionary decisions on how to award these funds. Your last call was in 2015. It covered fiscal years 15-16 to 18-19. You awarded a little over $2 million in funding to 7 city and county projects. And as a part of managing these projects that you award with these discretionary funding sources, you developed an online CIP database, which I found very helpful to track and monitor the projects that you funded in past cycles. That's a very helpful tool that you've developed. Again, just as a way of background, here are the projects that were approved for funding in 2015. Since that time, some of them have been unfunded and the funds reprioritized to other projects, but it gives you an idea of the projects that were funded in the last call for projects and the approximate amounts that were funded, were awarded to those projects. You've done a really good job at using these discretionary funding sources to leverage additional state and federal funds. For example, you've leveraged or matched $3.4 million from state or federal programs or other sources. I think you're even getting some funds from a state jail program for the Mountain Ranch Road project. You're very resourceful and doing a great job in leveraging these outside funds, using the funds that are awarded through these call for projects processes. And I'm just showing some of the examples of the various programs there down below that you've been able to leverage funds from. In December, you initiated the 2018 call for projects. There are 4 new years of revenue, fiscal years 19-20 to 22-23. There is some funding available that was handled in the prior call for projects, but it's from a deleted project, so it's in fiscal year 18-19, so that's being grouped into this call for projects as well. There's a small amount of CMAQ funding available as well in 18-19 from changes, the difference between estimates and actual apportionments since your last call was conducted. The total amount that's available for this call is about $2.3 million. You adopted guidelines in December for the conducting this call for projects. You defined in those guidelines eligible applicants, city, county, the COG, and non-JPA parties that have the endorsement of the city or county. You established ground rules for project evaluation by the Technical Advisory Committee. Those are the criteria in the box off to the side that are used to evaluate the projects. You set a schedule. Applications were due February 9th. And you did establish timely use of funds requirements for projects and sponsors that receive funding from the call for projects. So here's a summary of the funding applications that were received for this call for projects. 7 projects from the county, 6 from the city, totaling almost $5 million. You can see the amounts requested and the phases that they would apply the funding towards. And they were also asked to prioritize the projects, and so you can see the priority ranking for the city and the county for their respective projects. Per your guidelines, the TAC committee has to meet and evaluate these projects. So the TAC committee met on February 21st to review the applications, and the first draft program recommendation, a revised recommendation, and scores were sent out on February 23rd. And then on March 21st, the TAC met and came to a consensus on a programming recommendation. The strategy, the larger strategy of what incorporated into this recommendation is as follows. For CMAQ, the approach and the thought process for using the CMAQ funds is to try and concentrate these federal CMAQ dollars on a single project, and that's the Angels Creek Bicycle Pedestrian Project with the Park and Ride lot. This project scored highest in meeting regional goals. It has it scored on project readiness, its ability to be delivered. And the idea of concentrating these funds on one particular project is that, as you can see from the second, the bullets down below, it limits the liability of committing CMAQ funds, which are difficult to administer. They're a federal funding source. There's a lot of administrative burden to managing federal funds. It concentrates that burden on a single project, and there are also potentials to lapse these funds if they're not used in a timely manner. So putting these projects on a single project and then watching that project very carefully and managing that project very carefully also limits the liability of, or the risk of lapsing funds if a project is not delivered. For other projects, the thought process is to migrate those projects over to the RSTP program, which is a program, essentially it's a state cash program. It doesn't have those risks of lapsing funds. So that would be the Murphy's Grade Road project and Mountain Ranch Road project. These were projects funded with CMAQ in prior cycles. Their CMAQ funding would be replaced with RSTP funds. They would essentially just be migrated over and use some of the new RSTP programming capacity that's available in this funding cycle. The other thought that went into how to apply the CMAQ funds is that in the fiscal year 2021, from the last programming cycle, there was a $700,000 over-programming of funds in that fiscal year compared to the amount of apportionment that was going to be available. A very large over-programming in that particular fiscal year. So by migrating the projects, the Murphy's Grade Road and Mountain Ranch Road, over to the RSTP program, we eliminate that over-programming from the last call for projects cycle. So that was just some of the thinking and the thought behind how to apply the CMAQ funds during this call for project. The RSTP funding source, the thought process was to try and initiate and develop some shovel-ready projects to try and leverage those state and federal funds. That you've done such a good job leveraging those funding sources. And some of these projects that are being recommended for RSTP funding are low cost but high priority projects because they're safety projects. So by putting some RSTP dollars on them, you can leverage or match other funding sources, particularly safety funding sources from the state and federal governments. In this call, you're also awarding funds potentially for local transportation funds. But the recommendation is to leave these funds in a reserve, and there's not a lot, this is not a large funding source in this cycle, it's $64,000 total, but leave the funds in a reserve and look for opportunities to match or leverage state and federal funds in the future. So the COG staff scored and ranked the projects as follows. See the top 3 projects there. The projects in red are the ones that are actually being recommended for funding. That includes the top 3 projects on this ranking. The Auburn's Ferry left turn project was a project that has been funded previously through previous calls for projects. So this recommendation just continues funding it towards constructing and delivering it. And then there are some smaller projects down below that are recommended for funding, and I'll explain a little bit more why some projects farther down were recommended for funding. But here's just an overview of the respective projects being recommended for funding. Angels Creek Bike Ped Trail and Park and Ride Lot project to construct phase 1 of the project along Finnegan Lane and Vallecito Road. Environmental and design phases have been funded through a prior call for projects, and they are underway. The request made was for $1.7 million for construction of phase 1, and the recommendation is for $1.4 million using CMAQ funding. And again, the total amount being requested by the city and county was $5 million. We have a little over $2 million available, so we spread the dollars around as much as we could. And if this project does need additional funding, the full $1.7 million, it could come from another call for projects, your next call for projects, or there are probably possibilities of leveraging, again, outside funding.
I'm looking at our sheet here that we have here showing funding. County's only asking for about $2 million, so.
Oh, the full amount.
Surprise.
So.
Seems like we have the funds available for those projects.
The San Andreas S49 Gateway project between Airport and Mountain Ranch Road. This would be to fund improvements from the Gateway and Corridor study that were approved by the Board of Supervisors last fall. It includes adding a roundabout at the SR49 Airport Road intersection and realigning Angels Road, adding sidewalk and Class 2 bike lanes, stoplight at Mountain Ranch Road. It requested $2.3 million for preliminary engineering, and the recommendation on this one is $169,000 for a project study report. When I was here in December, one of the questions that came from the council was, what's the next STIP project after Wagon Trail? Do we have a project in the queue? The idea here would be that this would be one of the projects, this would be the project in the queue. So that's why the recommendation is to fund the project study report. That's the first step in getting that project eligible for the State Transportation Improvement Program, the same program that's funding your Wagon Trail project. So this is the first step in making this a STIP project like Wagon Trail currently is. Valley Springs School safety improvements. These would be safety improvements on Pine Street and Sequoia. You did receive a grant from Caltrans for a complete street study of $219,000. The funding being requested for this project is for preliminary engineering of the improvements that will be prioritized out of the study that is being funded by the Caltrans grant. So you complete that study, come up with a list of prioritized improvements, and you'll be able to use these dollars for preliminary engineering of those improvements. The recommendation is for $222,000, and that's the amount that was requested in the application. This is your left turn pocket project on our Burns Ferry Road. The design phase on this project is complete. This again is a left turn pocket at Dutchess into the Poker Flats subdivision. Right of way to relocate the utility poles should be completed this spring. And this is a project again that you have funded from prior calls for projects. So this would continue that support for this project from those prior calls. I noticed in the application that the Poker Flats Homeowners Association is even contributing to the project. The total cost is $905,000. The recommendation is for $30,500. That's the amount that was requested, and that will be used to match federal safety funds for construction. Here's one of those smaller projects that was a little bit farther down the list when the staff scored and ranked the projects. This is the Angels Camp Visitor Center electric vehicle charging station, and it would install 2 high-rate charging stations in the visitor center parking lot. And this project will benefit visitors coming to town driving electric vehicles, as well as any locals that may use electric vehicles. CMAQ funds have, again, timely use of funds requirements placed on them. You have 3 years to use them. You have a small amount of CMAQ funds that are potential of lapsing at the end of this federal fiscal year, $46,000. If this project can be accelerated and delivered in fiscal year 17-18, they're requesting $70,000. You will use at least the $46,000 and you will not lapse any funds. So that's the reason that this project, which is a little bit farther down the list, but is a relatively easy project to deliver, is one of the projects being recommended. And here's another one that was a little bit further down the list. It requested $10,000. It's a safety project to install guardrails between Struckman and Swiss Ranch Road. Of course, this railroad flat road is windy. There are steep embankments. It's recently been cleared of trees damaged in the fire. The total project cost is $32,000. The recommendation is for $10,000, as was requested for preliminary engineering. And again, that's going to be used as a match to leverage some of those federal safety funds. It's a small amount of money. It can fit in the program. It's a safety project, and we can start work on a safety improvement. A couple of other parts of the programming recommendation are to replace, again, to migrate some of the projects that were funded with CMAQ over to the RSTP program. Here's one of them. We're simply changing the color of money for the Angels Camp Murphy's Grade Road pedestrian improvement project that would add sidewalks and make 80 improvements from Bret Hart High School ball fields to Demarest Street. Again, we're just changing the color of money through this call for projects. That's the part of the recommendation. And the same with Mountain Ranch Road. Change the color of money. Instead of using CMAQ, we will transition it into the RSTP program, so same thought process as Murphy's Grade Road. Let's just change the color of money and focus the funds on the single project, the Angels Creek project. So. Staff recommendation tonight is to approve the programming of city and county projects as recommended by staff and the TAC for the RSTP, CMAQ, and LTF funding sources. This is the nuts and bolts of what it all looks like. It's attached to your staff report. This just shows, again, the mechanics of how we would accomplish the programming recommendation for the 3 funding sources. CMAQ on the top, RSTP in the middle, local transportation funds on the bottom. And I can go into detail and explain that if you have any questions about that. But at that, I will end my presentation and be happy to answer any questions.
Council, do you have any questions?
I do. The more boxes that are checked off on these applications, does that give us a better opportunity of obtaining these funds?
More boxes that are checked off on it.
I think in terms
Yeah,
of
I have 1, 2, 3.
the applications that the city and county submit in terms of meeting certain goals.
Oh,
Yeah.
So I think those are the applications that the city and county submit to us, and they kind of checked off what they felt, the project met
Okay.
in terms of those goals.
But does that give us a better opportunity if more boxes are checked off of receiving funds? Because there's 4 projects that I'm looking at. The O'Brien's Ferry one being one of them. It doesn't say anything about contributing to air quality or improving air quality. Page, let's see, 60 is the San Andreas 49 Gateway Corridor. It doesn't say anything about improved truck movement. The Angels Creek Bike and Pedestrian, and also the Capello Road pedestrian improvement. Neither one of those had anything checked off for community and economic development or air quality. And then my last one, 186. 186 is intersection lighting, SR4 at Angels Oaks Drive. I'm just curious how that, we were able to check off a box that says it encourages tourism. Not to take box checking away, but I was just kind of curious about that.
Well, I think, those boxes that you're referring to are the city and county applications. So those are kind of the city and county's initial analysis of their projects. And then as you'll see on the staff report, packet page 128, that table is when COG staff goes through and evaluates against the criteria that was specified in the guidelines,
Okay,
and then ranks them accordingly to that evaluation.
okay.
Tourists have to see where they're going. The light.
All right. Thanks, that's it.
A motion?
I'll give a motion, yes.
Okay, well, the motion that would be requested would be approving the programming of the fiscal year 2018-19 to 22-23 call for projects for the RSTP, CMAC, and LTF funds. We also are going to call for public comment
Yep.
as well. Is there any further council comment? Is there any public comment? Okay, seeing none, I hear a motion
Okay,
being
well, I'll
made.
move it.
Second. Second by Councilmember Muniz. Okay, so moved by Councilmember Catalano, seconded by Councilmember Muniz. Is there further council discussion? Seeing none, do we have call for the vote? All those in favor?
Aye.
Approved 7-0.
Thank you.
Agenda item number 9 is the unmet transit needs public hearing. This is to be presented by Ms. Collins.
Thank you. As the council is aware, as the Regional Transportation and Planning Agency, the COG is responsible for implementing the Transportation Development Act. And one of the requirements under the Transportation Development Act is that each year we conduct an unmet transit needs public hearing to collect feedback on transportation services being offered through local transportation funds, which is one of the main sources of funding for the public transit system here in Calaveras County. 2 public hearings are offered this year, one this evening, and then the second public hearing is on April 17th at the City Council meeting at the firehouse in the City of Angels Camp. The purpose of these hearings is to solicit feedback regarding unmet transit needs in the county. We also solicit input. We have an unmet transit needs form that's on our website, also advertised through the buses and at other social service agency departments. They have the brochures as well. So we collect feedback throughout the year. Then we develop a report that's submitted to Caltrans by August. So we'll be bringing back a report to you in August. And so if the council has any questions or request you to open the public hearing.
Any questions on what we're doing?
No, but I think you need to actually
I
open
will
the
be
hearing.
as soon as I find out if the council's ready. Okay. We're opening the public hearing regarding unmet transit needs. So do we have any public that would like to speak on unmet transit needs at this time?
I think we kind of had ones come in already.
We did, and I think the gentleman's standing up
I
again.
think he's going to stand up again.
This is interesting fun. I am Edward Hall, and I found out that Amador had a run from the Sutter Hill Transit Station to Sacramento, and I asked a lot of people how to get out of here down to those areas in Stockton. So I'm glad for it, and they have 2 runs, 6 o'clock in the morning, 6:15, and then 3:30 in the afternoon. My real concern is that when I catch that bus from Sacramento back to the Sutter Hill, once I get there, there's no service because I've got to go from there all the way back to San Andreas. And Calaveras recently put in a run from Rayleigh's at 6 o'clock to go to San Andreas. But that bus does not get to Sutter Hill till like 6:30. So there's if the Calaveras and Amador would coordinate in such a way that Sutter Hill is what's important, I'd like to see Calaveras extend their time so that they would actually wait till Sutter Hill bus gets there, and then at least there'd be a sense of completeness, because otherwise I found myself waiting at the Safeway store and staying at the store all night until the transit system started running again the next day. That's my second concern, the Go Run being down, and then this gap in service.
Yes, absolutely.
And the only other thing I can probably think of, it actually frightens me a little bit to think that there's some bad things that may be happening in Stockton and Sacramento to get that negative flow of people coming through once they find out they can get in and out real easy. But for us that don't have transportation, we actually need that kind of service. I'd hate for it to be like a crack in the dam. You can start a little good thing, and all of a sudden you got a flood of unwanted people here. So that's my concern. I'm happy with this opportunity, and I'd be glad to be able to do anything I can. I'm going to go back home and get on my computer and study the goal lines and so forth, and make personal effort to contact the colleges and Columbia and so forth, see what they have, talk to human services and whatnot, and I guess we'll all be happy. I can't think of anything else to say. I do thank you.
We thank you as well.
Thank you.
Is there any other public comment? Seeing none, we will close the public hearing. And that concludes the item number 9, unmet transit needs public hearing.
Yeah, I got to make one comment though. What this gentleman was saying about the run to Amador County makes perfect sense. We should have meshed with Amador County lines so somebody can get through and it all works and what it's intended to do. So, make perfect sense what you're saying, sir.
Okay. Agenda item number
Chair,
10.
before you move on.
Oh, go ahead.
That also includes Columbia, because as we move there, we've got Tuolumne Transit picking up. Are we putting people at risk at off hours of the day and night simply because we get them into Columbia, or we can't get them out again because they've arrived there from Tuolumne Transit and we can't pick them up? Because their schedules don't mesh either in the Columbia area, and we send a lot of our students over to Columbia College. So it's just to look at it from both sides of the county and understand that we do need to mesh with our neighboring transit systems.
And that would certainly, once that started meshing and working, it would certainly increase ridership, I'm sure, because people would start talking and saying, hey, you can now get through. They may not be using it simply because you can't get a smooth transition. You
Yeah.
get there, but you can't get back.
It's the uncertainty. I agree. I fully agree. Thank you for the conversation. Thank you.
Further council comment?
Okay.
Item number 10 is the approving the fiscal year 2017-18 overall work program administrative amendment. Ms. Raggio.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. As stated in my staff report, we're requesting not to amend the total amount of the overall work program. We're recommending moving funding that's already been allocated into the overall work program and moving it to work element number 11, the transit planning and organizational structure analysis. If the council has any questions, I'd be happy to answer them.
Council? Is there any public comment on item number 10? Seeing none, do we have a motion to approve the overall work program administrative amendment?
So moved.
Moved by Councilmember
Second.
Davies, seconded by Councilmember Tofinelli. All those in favor?
Aye.
Approved 7-0.
What is this one? What is this?
This next one is authorizing contract amendment number 1, agenda item number 11, with McGuire Management Consultancy for tasks associated with the implementation of the Calais Transit Agency Transition Plan. Ms. Collins.
All right, thank you, Chair. This is a follow-up action from the previous item of approving the administrative amendment. The contract was awarded to McGuire Management Consultancy in November to assist the city and county in the formation of a joint powers agency for Calaveras Transit, as well as development of a transition plan. Those tasks have been completed. The city and county have approved the JPA effective March 6th of 2018. So now, as we move forward in the transition process between now and July, we need assistance in the various multiple implementation tasks that are associated with really building a new organization, as well as transitioning everything from the county to the new JPA, as well as transitioning all of the federal and state grant programs. So we're requesting amendment number 1 with McGuire Management Consultancy for an amount of $28,800.
Council comment.
You feel that's all the work that you're going to need?
Well, it's tough to foresee. Right now, we are just trying to look for, what we need through to implementation of the agency through July 1.
And just to get to that point.
Yeah, so right now, we're just trying to get to that point and working through this transition phase. Sometimes there's a lot of unknowns, but right now, this is what we anticipate needing in the next 3 months.
Okay. And the rest of it will go into next year's budget anyway, so,
Okay.
okay.
I'm looking at Exhibit A, page 201. And it says direct costs. You just talked about the 8 trips. This has airfare listed. Did you move to Florida or somewhere and we have to pay for your flights in and out of here?
There is not likely to be any airfare involved in any of this.
Oh, okay. I was just checking because it says airfare here.
It's standard language.
I thought maybe you moved, Phil. I didn't know.
Yeah, Paul, and to clarify, airfare was not included in the calculation of that direct cost for the 8 trips.
I realize it's a
So-
template thing
Yes.
that's put in there, but I just had to give them something.
Think of
the
it.
trouble with.
Is there any further council comment? Is there any public comment? Seeing none, do we have a motion to approve contract amendment number 1 with Macquarie Management? Moved by Councilmember.
Second.
And second, Councilmember Munides. All those in favor?
Aye.
All approved, 7. Agenda item number 12, resolution fiscal year 18-19, approving the fiscal year 17-18 LTF claim to the Calaveras County Public Works Department for transit operations in the amount of $546,597. Ms. Raggio.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. As you stated, the claim is in the amount of $546,597, and COG staff is recommending approval. In the attachment, as you can see, the budget as of March 1st, $59,000 in revenue has been collected to date at that time. So staff is recommending this claim get the county some money. The account is currently running in the negative. I think we're kind of in the same position we've been in the last 4 years. If the council has any questions, I'd be happy to answer them.
Council comments?
Why is the claim not in compliance with the COG policies and procedures?
In our TDA guidebook, it states that the claim should be submitted in June of the previous fiscal year. So we're in April. So we're just letting you know that it's out of compliance. We realize that, but we're in a situation, we're in a transition, so we're asking you to approve the claim.
Any further council comment? Any public comment? Seeing none, do we have a motion to approve the LTF claim?
So moved.
Second.
Moved by Councilmember Mills, seconded by Councilmember Munides. All those in favor?
Aye.
Approved, 7. Item number 13, the county report.
Jeff Krovitz, County Public Works. For the CIP projects report, the Burns Ferry Road overhead utility relocation, construction is complete. That project will be closed out with the final agreement that's currently in process with PG&E, and then we will move on to construction. And you saw that listed in the call for projects. The Wagon Trail project, we have moved the request for proposals for the PS&E portion for the development of construction documents and also design support during construction, support for right-of-way to County Department review. We hope that's a matter of days, and then we will post it on the public purchase website. And we think we'll get good competition for it. The request for proposals for the project management consultant on that project, since it is large, it is complex, and we believe that we need a higher level of professional support on this, is taking just a little bit longer. We've worked with Caltrans on the content of the RFP. They had some comments that they gave back to us, and we've addressed those comments. I expect this to be moved on to intercounty review tomorrow or the next day, very, very soon. The duration of advertisement for these are a little bit different. The project management won't take very long, I think, for a consultant firm to put together, but the proposal for the PS&E, I don't want to advantage the firm that got us to this place, and I want to give other firms a chance to have fair competition. I'd like to give them a little bit of time. We're currently, I think, at 5 weeks, and I think we're currently at 3 weeks for the project management. So any questions on that?
Yes, Jeff, your next phase would begin about when then?
I would assume the phase would begin early fall.
Early fall.
Early fall, fair to say?
Everybody okay with that?
That right-of-way acquisition?
Yeah, I think we discussed September as the goal for getting the PSNE contract.
Okay.
And last thing on Wagon Trail is we've established a work group, and we're going to have periodic meetings as needed. I think this is important during the transition, while we're kind of between project approval and PSNE. So I think that'll be a good thing. I believe our first meeting is tomorrow afternoon. And Amber, I did forward to you the RFP for the PSNE services this evening, right before I came up. Let's see. That's all I have on capital improvement projects, unless you have specific questions on other projects that I did not discuss. I don't have changed news from the last time I was in front of this group in March.
So the low water crossing is still pretty much a go?
It's moving. You're talking about the Hoover Road low water crossing?
No, I'm talking about the stagecoach, upper
Oh,
stagecoach.
absolutely. I just actually signed the board packages for construction management and for construction contracts. So we successfully advertised, bid, and we're making recommendation for award by the board. I think, I've already forgotten whether that is the second meeting in April or the first meeting in May.
I know we were kind of holding off construction or going to construction until after the rains were completely out of that area.
And let it dry down a little
Yeah,
bit,
let it
especially
dry
when you're
down.
dealing with a low water crossing, or what was a low water crossing.
Yeah, thank you.
So and we'll speak more to that during board hearing, but we are hoping that we can complete the construction in one season. I've actually have the contracts go for an additional year in case we do not complete in the first construction season. We run into an unforeseen circumstance, but also to give us the ability to close out the construction contract with Caltrans. So both the construction administration management and the construction contract go to the end of 19.
And the status on single tree is still the same?
Yes.
Okay.
Thank you.
Any further council comment on the county report? Any public comment? Seeing none, the transit report.
You just received the audit results, and we did too. I had the performance report on the board agenda at the last meeting and pushed it because we had a lot of information that was changing that was going to affect our fare box recovery as we were trying to discover the truth of can we apply the sale value of surplus capital to our fare box recovery. So we will be updating that and bringing it back onto board agenda. I hope that will occur not necessarily Tuesday, but the last meeting in April. I also have a little bit of this is if anybody in the public wants to see it. Kind of a summary of the solar bus stop lighting project that's funded through Cal OES. I mentioned this last meeting where we were involved in the middle of that one. We've now completed it. I've given you a list of project sites where these lights have been installed. I've given you a list of the solar lights that we have purchased and stored here at the county for the future bus stop improvements. And then I gave information on the lights that we chose, their lighting distribution. They're all solar and they're all LED. And for those of you who are really geeky, the back, it's a lumen distribution in terms of how the lighting goes. One question that we received recently is that if there is no motion, yet it's dark, the lights are on, but they're dull. If there's motion and there's also a push button, the lights brighten up. So, and that's that's part of the design of the light features so that when we actually have people in the bus stop after dark, lights are bright, very visible to the drivers.
So that's what that button's for, to turn the light on?
It doesn't turn it on, it makes it brighter.
Brighter, yeah.
Yeah. Any questions on this? Okay. The status of the Phase 4 bus stop improvement projects, we are drafting in the comments received from Caltrans encroachment permits, preparing a transmittal letter. Had a conference call with them a couple of weeks ago to discuss some issues at the Moke Hill stop. Amber and I haven't quite finished off our coordination on that, but we are continuing to get this ready to list
Okay.
so that we can construct as much as we possibly can this year. Any questions on those? Concludes the transit report, unless you have questions.
Seeing none.
Thank you.
City report. Ms. Eads.
Melissa Eads, City of Angels Camp. I have nothing to report on the status of our capital projects this evening, but I did want to let the council know that Dave Hanham no longer works for the City of Angels Camp. He's taken a position with the City of Chowchilla, so I will be doing my best to fill in at these meetings once a month, so I look forward to seeing you all and working with you all again. And if you have any questions that would apply to Dave, please feel free to contact me or Amy Augustine in our community development office, and I'd be happy to connect you with her if you need to reach out to her and get in contact with her at any time. So any questions for me?
Yeah, I do have a question.
Sure.
Does it feel weird standing on that
It
side?
does, it does, it does. I know that when I first came back, I just sort of walked to this direction and everybody sort of looked at me like, get back in the seats. So,
Very
all
good.
right, well, thank you.
Caltrans report.
Good evening, council members, staff. I'm Michelle Demetris from the Office of Rural Planning, Caltrans District 10, here on behalf of Kevin Schroeder, the acting office chief, who is at a conference this week. So I am here to kind of liaise with you. Just a few things. We received your draft OWP, and we've sent a comment letter with suggestions and recommendations. If you haven't gotten that already, you will be soon. We've been working with your staff on a number of grants that you've been awarded. And also, I wanted to let you know, especially those of you who are county supervisors, we did have a request from one of your constituents about an overhead, not a signal, but an overhead light, street light near the intersection of State Route 26 and the entry road to the La Contenta frontage road. They came directly to our public information office. So that, if you hear about that from any of your constituents, we are working on that. There was a project there, the Silver Rapids Curve project that was completed more than 10 years ago. There was some question whether there was supposed to be an overhead light from that project. So anyway, just so that you know, it's being worked on.
Excuse me.
Yes.
With the intention to put an overhead light there? Or
To
to a
see-
study to determine?
Right, we're actually looking into right-of-way. At this point, I don't think we're even sure whether it's Caltrans property or not, so.
Okay.
But it is, in case you're here, that is really
Well, it's not my
interesting.
district, but it's next to my district, and Supervisor Clapp is actually the supervisor. So
Okay.
I'll let him know.
Okay, thank you. I think I saw this in your packet. Just a reminder, the ATP, Active Transportation Plan Grant Program should open May 16th. That's the promise. And then I believe December would be the announcements. That's not my unit, but in case you're wondering about that. And then finally, I just wanted to let you know that my day job is working with Amador County, although I always love to come to Calaveras, you know that. And I am a ex officio member of their social services, transportation, advisory committee, and I do want you to know that there is strong desire on behalf of Amador Transit to work with Calaveras, because I know you're in flux right now, and I think they wanted to kind of see how things shake out. But I know that that's something that comes up at our meetings a lot, and they are interested in. I think Tuolumne might be a little optimistic at this point, but certainly there are things that can be done between Amador and Calaveras County that could be helpful, I think, to writers. Okay, any questions for me? Any issues that you would like me to take back to the district?
Yeah, as a public member, I'll address a little bit more on that La Contenta question. There is no La Contenta frontage road. There is the road that comes from the range that intersects Highway 26 at that area, and it might be that it's that intersection that they're talking about the lighting itself.
Yeah.
La Contenta just recently reopened, but the entrance to the golf course is actually right on 26. There's no frontage road.
Yeah,
I thought she was saying La Contenta, not the golf course, but La Contenta. And I took it as possibly several things.
The road past the new intersection?
Yeah.
As you're going westbound on the left-hand side.
Yes.
Yeah, I guess there's a question that needs clarification on where Caltrans right-of-way ends and the county, or it could even be homeowners association, private property begins.
Yes,
So,
it's La Contenta. I'm kind of a little bit somewhat familiar with it.
Gotcha.
Michelle, I represent Angels Camp up, and because Supervisor Oliveira is in here, basically through District 3, which is Arnold. The area around Murphy's, where there's an afterbay for the powerhouse, has been the subject of numerous accidents, including loss of life. Is there a possibility that Caltrans might explore guardrails along that afterbay on the highway, as well as below the afterbay? There's a dam there. Below the afterbay, we have lost a lot of vehicles. I personally have had to extricate people out of there. A guardrail, just to explore the possibility.
okay,
Of a
what was
guardrail.
that? That's SR4?
State Route 4 at the Utica Afterbay,
How do you spell that?
UTICA,
Oh, as in New York?
Afterbay.
Okay.
And it would be also below that area as well. There's a road that goes in to the right at that point when you're eastbound, but this would be below that and above it.
Okay, you know, you can, Amber would probably know how to do this. You can write a letter
Yeah, I'm going to
requesting-
follow up that request.
Yeah.
I just sent your standing
Okay,
here. I
very good.
thought I'd throw it
Yes,
out.
thank you.
Thank you.
Okay. Council reports.
I have nothing.
Nothing to report.
Mr. Toffenelli.
Well, I guess I'll follow suit.
Ms. Warren?
Nothing to report.
All right, well, since you left it to me, I want to thank the council for allowing me to serve as chair again, because one of the opportunities as your chair, I have the privilege of going to the California Council of Governments Conference in Monterey every March. And attending that again this year, it was again a encouraging and challenging conference. Many highlights from many different presentations, not just transportation related, but more thinking about how the general public is changing its use of transportation and its thinking of, and one of the excellent presentations given was on retail and the change in thinking from a big box store center type mall structure, even as we've talked about in Calaveras County, maybe a Target or a Walmart or something here, to kind of anchor an area to get more people to come. And the statistically shown changing in purchasing and retail today, where the younger, and I'll say younger, the millennial generation, which is what they're talking about, is thinking more now of destinations and food and trips, and the trip itself getting to an area being the driving force, due to the fact that retail itself is changing so dynamically with Amazon and Walmart marketplace. And it was a very interesting discussion, because although it was tailored towards the urban planning perspective, when you look at our rural environment, and we look at our centers, Copperopolis with Coppertown Square, Angels Camp with its nice downtown, Murphy's with its side route, West Point, with its actually has a potential for downtown, and when you go up there for Lumberjack Days, it's a neat little town to go check out. Same thing with Valley Springs. You have both the terrace kind of separated from downtown Valley Springs, but you've got two centers there in Valley Springs, along with the La Cantera Golf Course, happily being reopened, to kind of draw folks as a destination where there is also the draw not just to look for retail, but also to look for it as an experience. And that was really a highlighted commentary of what is really, when you look at it from a transportation perspective, more of the future and planning and draw that we need to be thinking about. A much greater emphasis now to be thinking as well on shared efforts on transportation with Lyft and Uber, and in your transportation planning and thinking that you need to factor in the fact that people do take Uber and Lyft and they don't always drive to their final destination. What that means is that if you are planning a parking lot for your retail environment, do you need to have such a large parking lot dedication? When people don't drive that often, they'll take transit, either Uber, Lyft, or mass transit to get there and get back because it's safer. And we've talked about that with our own transit. It'd be great to have a wine bus, a safe way of getting back and forth in our county from Angels Camp World Mark up to Murphy's, for example. And that was some of the thinking that was given. Another presentation made was talking about how Gomentum, which is a 5,000 acre site in the old Concord Naval Air Station, is the Northern California's largest secure test bed for automated vehicle and connected vehicle testing today. Its choice in that location had to do specifically with the fact that you are in an area in California where technically you have Silicon Valley, where you have some of the best and brightest minds, and that's why Tesla's down there, centered between that and Sacramento, which legislatively has to approve any changes where you get to connected vehicles and automated vehicles. And a large commentary had to do with connected vehicles, one section on freight, where you might have two trucks now, and they're thinking that the two truck concept where you have a lead truck and 36 feet behind it, a secondary truck. The lead truck actually handles all the acceleration, braking, and turning for both trucks. So you could have a secondary driver, but basically he's either relaxing, sleeping, or maybe there if it's a tricky section of road, maybe there's backup. You want that job to be the secondary driver? But the fact that you can more efficiently use your lane miles now at faster speeds safely with the connected vehicle concepts, as well as on just general transportation, the ability for vehicles today not just to see like a 20 to 40 foot bubble around them, but actually the technology now exists today to go up to 900 feet ahead and around corners where it's blind, where you have buildings in place. Additionally, non-vehicle traffic detection, so if you have people along the sidewalks, the vehicle you're in would have the ability to detect pedestrians, bicyclists, and collision avoidance and safety is a huge component of this automated vehicle testing and research that's being done. Cybersecurity and public infrastructure, big topic, huge issue, because so much more now connectivity is being done with your vehicles that they want to make sure that you don't have that as an issue. Union Pacific, the trains, made a big presentation, and safety, everybody's been reading about some of the train issues that's happened recently because they make news because they don't happen very often. But PTC is called positive train control. And we've had some incidents this year where train engines were not monitored with PTC. Amtrak's head just came out and said no passenger trains from Amtrak will run a passenger if they don't have PTC enabled after the end of 2018. So that's a big statement. Their goal is safety also, and PTC is a very strong way in trains. I'll try and wrap it up here. Another emphasis had to do with the education of what SB1 is doing today. There are two measures, one that's qualified, which is to protect the SB1 funds and guarantee that it's going to take the money that SB1 is generating, the gas tax money, and solely make sure it goes to transportation. About 60% of that money right now is already constitutionally guaranteed. There's a measure on the upcoming ballot to guarantee the other 40%. That's Prop 69. That too will also guarantee the other 40%, so that 100% of all gas tax money collected will not be able to be diverted legislatively anymore. And that's a concern that's out there, so that's why that's in place.
Is that
Yeah.
altering SB 1, John?
That's related to SB 1 Prop
It
69.
is altering the existing SB 1.
It is constitutionally protecting the funds being generated by SB 1 income. And apparently 40% could still be somehow loopholed out unless Prop 69 passes. And so that's why they're saying yes on Prop 69. The other thing is that there is an effort down south to repeal SB 1 as a tax that they don't like. And it's unfortunate that that's out there, but it is. And the realistic is that it may qualify for the ballot. As the transportation body here, we have already seen directly in Calaveras County the benefits of SB 1 funds coming in. Amber has noted that we had the Valley Springs study for the school safe route down there in Valley Springs, the Angels Camp North Main project, and the San Andreas Pope Street project studies are all funded with SB 1 money, and that's about $550,000. In addition, and separately, Angels Camp just received $1.9 million from the ATP for their projects in Angels Camp. That $1.9 million is because of SB 1. So we are seeing already direct benefits because of SB 1 funds coming through. Independently of that, because we all love acronyms, there's a new acronym out called RMRA, the Remote Maintenance and Rehab Funds, which are now available to the city and county. Those are new funds being presented to both the county and the city as a direct result of SB 1 funding. So when you start hearing people say, oh, we're rural, we're Calaveras, we shouldn't be allowing this gas tax to hit us, recognize education is what we need to present to our constituents. It's very valuable, and it's hitting us here at home in a positive way. There were more topics there. The CalCOG website has all the presentation PowerPoints online now. As I said, as I started, it's both challenging and encouraging to see some of, I think, the best and brightest minds looking forward for California, not just in 5 years, not just even 10 years, but they're talking 20 years out on how our transportation needs as this state grows from 40 million people to 60 million people probably in the next 50 years. And how that's going to impact it, how we can more efficiently make use of our roadways today with the connected vehicles and automated vehicles, as opposed to just trying to build more lane miles with existing driver technology today. And it's encouraging. There's a lot of good stuff happening. And as your council chair, I want to thank you for allowing me to go to that. It's a very valuable conference. So that's my report.
Good report.
Staff reports. Ms. Ruggiero?
I just have one quick update. The Murphy's Complete Streets Plan is well underway now, and we have the first community workshop on April 25th at 5 p.m. at the old schoolhouse. And my apologies, I didn't have the flyer ready, or else I would have put it on correspondence. But it has a website now, murphyscompletestreets.com, and that'll host, all information about the project, and it'll have opportunities for feedback during different phases of the project. And unless the council has any other questions on the staff report I provided, I have no other updates.
Any council comments, questions?
I do. RFPs for the Pope Street and Valley Springs Elementary, have they been, not yet?
Yeah, those have not been released yet, but the Valley Springs is first on my list to get out.
Okay. All right, so soon.
Yes.
Okay.
Okay. Seeing no further information on the staff reports, this brings us to adjournment of the Calaveras Council of Governments meeting. Our next meeting is scheduled for May 2nd in these chambers at 5:30. Thank you.